"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." The voice was young, sharp, and laced with an impatience that sliced through the festive air of Fleet Day. Petty Officer Miles Corbin, no older than 25, stood with his arms crossed, blocking the gangway to the Navy's newest crown jewel, the nuclear submarine USS Vanguard. Before him, Felix Sparks, 89 years old, stood perfectly still. He didn't lean on his simple wooden cane. His back, though stooped by age, held a straightness that seemed to defy gravity. His gaze was fixed on the sleek black hull of the submarine, a silent giant resting in the waters of Port Adams Naval Base. The sun glinted off the water, and the smell of salt and diesel fuel was the same perfume he'd known his entire life. Corbin sighed, a theatrical puff of air. "Sir, this is an active-duty vessel, not a tourist attraction for everyone. The line for the public tour is over there." He gestured vaguely with his chin toward a queue of families and teenagers snaking along the pier. Felix slowly turned his head, his pale blue eyes clouded with cataracts but clear with intent, finally meeting the young officers. "I'm not here for a tour," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper weathered by time and the sea. Corbin's partner, a younger seaman named Reyes, shifted his weight, his discomfort obvious. He saw the cluster of medals, faded and barely visible, pinned to the inside of the old man's worn tweed jacket, which Felix had opened slightly in the heat. "Look, Gramps," Corbin said, dropping the last pretense of professional courtesy. His voice rose, drawing the attention of those nearby. "I don't have time for this. You don't have a pass, you don't have an invitation. You need to clear the area, now." The crowd was starting to thicken. Phones, like metallic insects, were beginning to emerge, their lenses pointed at the confrontation. A quiet murmur rippled through the onlookers. Felix didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply reached into his jacket, the one that smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it he produced a laminated card. It was an old Veterans Administration identification, the photo showing a much younger man with a square jaw and eyes that burned with a fierce light. Corbin barely glanced at it. He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "A VA card. That's not a security clearance. This is a billion-dollar piece of military hardware. You think we let any old-timer who claims he was in the service just wander on board?" He pushed the card back toward Felix's chest with 2 fingers, a gesture of profound disrespect. "I'm not going to ask you again. Leave." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that Felix felt on behalf of the uniform he once wore, not for himself. He saw the smirks on some faces in the crowd, the pity on others. He saw Seaman Reyes looking at the ground, ashamed. The noise of the crowd, the crying of a child, the distant call of gulls, all of it seemed to fade into a dull roar. The young petty officer was a wall of arrogant certainty, and Felix was just an old man, an inconvenience, a ghost from a past they had no time for. Corbin was enjoying the audience now. He was the man in charge, the gatekeeper. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue, or did you just forget where you parked your horse and buggy?" The words were meant to sting, and they did, but not in the way Corbin intended. Felix's hand, gnarled and spotted with age, instinctively went to a small lump in his breast pocket. He wasn't touching it, but he could feel its shape through the thin fabric. For a fraction of a second, the bright sunny pier dissolved. The smell of salt was replaced by the acrid scent of battery acid and recycled air. The sounds of the crowd vanished, replaced by the terrifying rhythmic ping of active sonar, each pulse a hammer blow against a fragile steel hull. He was a young man again, his knuckles white as he gripped a periscope handle. The submarine, the USS Stingray, groaned around him under the immense pressure of the deep, dark water. Outside, unseen but felt in the very marrow of his bones, Soviet depth charges were walking their way closer, each explosion a seismic shockwave that threatened to tear them apart. He could feel the cool, worn metal of the St. Christopher medal in his hand, a desperate prayer in a world of crushing darkness. The vision passed in a heartbeat. He was back on the pier, the sun hot on his face, the petty officer's sneer still fixed in place. The object in his pocket felt heavy, a small anchor to a lifetime of secrets. He had not come here to cause a scene. He had only come to say goodbye, a private pilgrimage to the memory of the men who had served with him, men whose faces were now clearer in his mind than those of the people standing a few feet away. He had commanded a vessel like this, a predecessor, a ghost of steel and steam. He had only wanted to stand on the deck of its descendant one last time, to feel the familiar vibrations, to honor the continuity of the service. But the path was blocked by a boy in a uniform who saw only a frail old man. In the growing crowd, a woman stood near the back, her brow furrowed. She wasn't a tourist. Doc Eris Thorne was the chief curator for the National Naval History Museum, and she was at Port Adams to consult on a new exhibit. She had been drawn over by the raised voice of the petty officer. At first, she felt a familiar annoyance at the lack of respect. Then she heard the old man's name, spoken in a quiet murmur to the younger seaman who looked so apologetic. "My name is Felix Sparks," the old man had said, not as a challenge but as a simple statement of fact. The name hit Dr. Thorne like a jolt of electricity. Felix Sparks. It couldn't be. The Felix Sparks was a legend, a ghost, a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the most secure archives of naval history. A man whose entire file was still classified at the highest levels, marked with a single cryptic project name, Whispering Shadow. She had spent years trying to get that file declassified, hitting one brick wall after another. Most records listed him as deceased, a convenient fiction to protect a man who knew too much. Her heart hammered in her chest. She looked at the old man's calm, dignified face, the way he stood, unbowed in the face of this public humiliation. It had to be him. Fumbling in her purse, she pulled out her phone, her hands shaking slightly. She bypassed the public relations officer she was supposed to meet and scrolled through her contacts to a private number she had used only once before, a direct line she had been given for emergencies of historical significance. The phone rang. An aide answered, his voice crisp and official. "Admiral Thompson's office." "This is Dr. Eris Thorne," she said, her voice low and urgent, trying not to be overheard. "I need to speak with the Admiral. It is a matter of the utmost and most immediate importance. The Admiral is in a strategic briefing, ma'am. I can take a message." "No, you don't understand," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "You need to interrupt him, right now. Tell him there is a man at the gangway of the USS Vanguard at Pier 7. Tell him his name is Felix Sparks." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Could you spell that name, ma'am?" She did, her teeth clenched. "Tell him Captain Felix Sparks is being denied entry and threatened with removal by base security. Tell the Admiral, just tell him the commander of the Stingray is here." Inside the climate-controlled quiet of the base command building, Admiral Thompson, a man whose face was a roadmap of command decisions, listened to his aide with growing irritation. The briefing was critical. "Sir," the aide said, holding the phone to his chest. "A Dr. Thorne from the Naval Museum. She insists on speaking with you." She mentioned a name, a Captain Felix Sparks. Thompson waved a dismissive hand. "Take a message." "Sir," the aide persisted, his own face now pale. "She said to tell you, the commander of the Stingray is at Pier 7. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Admiral Thompson froze, his pen hovering over a tactical map. The name and the ship designation landed in the quiet room with the force of a depth charge. The other officers in the briefing looked at him, confused by his sudden stillness. The name meant nothing to them. To Admiral Thompson, it meant everything. He slowly put his pen down. He looked at his aide and all the irritation was gone, replaced by an expression of utter cold disbelief. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The aide repeated the message. Thompson stood up so abruptly his chair scraped back loudly on the polished floor. "Clear the room," he commanded. The other officers, startled, filed out without a word. The Admiral snatched the phone from his aide. "Aris," he barked into the receiver. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" Dr. Thorne's voice came through, strained but firm. "No, Admiral. He's here. He's real. And he's being humiliated by one of your petty officers." Thompson closed his eyes for a moment, a storm of emotions crossing his face, shock, fury, and a deep, profound sense of shame. "Keep him there," he ordered. "Do not under any circumstances let him leave. I'm on my way." He slammed the phone down and looked at his aide. "Get me my car, now. Get the base commander on the line. I want a full Marine honor guard at Pier 7. I want them there 5 minutes ago. Move." Back on the sun-drenched pier, Petty Officer Corbin's patience had finally evaporated. The growing crowd and their silent judgment were unnerving him, and his solution was to escalate. He was going to remove the source of his problem. "That's it. I'm done with this," he announced, puffing out his chest. He turned to the trembling seaman Reyes. "Reyes, call security. Tell them we have a disoriented individual who may be a danger to himself. We're taking him in for an evaluation." This was the final straw. He wasn't just dismissing the old man, he was threatening to strip him of his dignity, to label him as senile and confused, to have him hauled away like a common vagrant. Felix heard the words, and for the first time, a flicker of deep, profound sorrow crossed his face. Not for himself, but for the uniform the boy wore, and for the service that had clearly forgotten its most important lessons. He clutched his cane, his knuckles white. Just as Corbin took a step forward, reaching out to grab Felix's arm. A sound pierced the air, cutting through the noise of the crowd. It wasn't a police siren. It was the high, urgent wail of an official escort. Heads turned. Down the long expanse of the pier, a motorcade of 3 black sedans was approaching at a speed that was both unsafe and unapologetic. They screeched to a halt just feet from the gangway, scattering a few onlookers. Doors flew open, and 6 United States Marines in full-dress blues emerged. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized precision, forming a cordon, their white-gloved hands holding their rifles, their faces impassive. The crowd fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Petty Officer Corbin froze, his hands still outstretched, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Seaman Reyes looked like he had seen a ghost. The rear door of the lead sedan opened. Out stepped a man in the crisp white uniform of a 4-star Admiral. His face was thunderous, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. Admiral Thompson didn't even glance at the Marines. He strode past the petrified Corbin as if he were a piece of furniture, his eyes locked on one person only. He stopped 2 feet in front of Felix Sparks. The crowd held its collective breath. The Admiral, one of the most powerful men in the United States Navy, drew himself up to his full, imposing height. He then executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his entire career. His hand sliced through the air and held there, trembling slightly with the force of his emotion. "Captain Sparks." Admiral Thompson's voice boomed across the silent pier, clear and ringing with a respect that bordered on reverence. "It is an honor, sir." Felix, looking at the Admiral, slowly, almost reluctantly, raised a hand in a frail return salute. A confused murmur spread through the crowd. "Captain? This old man?" Admiral Thompson dropped his salute but kept his eyes on Felix. Then he turned, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing on Petty Officer Corbin with the force of a physical blow. Corbin visibly flinched. "For those of you who do not know," the Admiral began, his voice radiating authority, "you are standing in the presence of a genuine American hero. In 1968, during a mission so secret most of you will never read about it, this man, Captain Felix Sparks, was in command of the diesel submarine USS Stingray." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Captain Sparks and his crew were on patrol in the Barents Sea when the carrier group Enterprise came under threat from a fleet of Soviet hunter-killer submarines. They were outgunned, outmatched, and completely cut off. Communications were down. The Enterprise was sailing into a trap. Corbin's face had gone from chalk white to a blotchy, sick-looking red. Reyes was staring at Felix with wide-eyed, dawning awe. With no orders and no support, the Admiral continued, his voice thick with emotion. Captain Sparks made a decision. He turned his small, aging submarine directly toward the Soviet fleet. He conducted a series of maneuvers so audacious, so brilliantly reckless, that he convinced the enemy his single diesel boat was a fleet of fast-attack nuclear subs. He made himself the target. For 72 hours, the Stingray endured a relentless barrage of depth charges, drawing the entire Soviet hunter-killer squadron on a chase across the Arctic Circle, giving the Enterprise the time it needed to escape. The crowd was utterly captivated. Phones were no longer just recording. They were held aloft like candles at a vigil. He saved over 5,000 American lives that day. The Admiral finished, his voice cracking slightly. He brought his boat home with half a crew and a hull that looked like scrap metal, and then he faded into silence because his country asked him to. He never asked for a medal. He never asked for a parade, and today he turned his head slowly, his eyes now blazing with fury as he stared directly at Corbin. He didn't even ask for basic human decency. He just wanted to see a submarine. The silence that followed was broken by a single person clapping, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire pier erupted in thunderous, sustained applause. It wasn't for the Admiral. It was for the quiet old man with the cane, who simply bowed his head, his shoulders shaking slightly. Admiral Thompson waited for the applause to die down before he turned his full attention back to the disgraced petty officer. His voice dropped to a low, menacing growl. "You stand on the shoulders of giants, petty officer, men who built this Navy with their courage and their blood, and you just tried to kick one of them out from under you because he didn't have the right piece of paper." He stepped closer, invading Corbin's space. "You will report to my office tomorrow morning at 0800. You will be in your dress uniform, and you will explain to me why you are worthy of wearing it. Consider your career, son. Consider it very carefully." Corbin could only stammer, "Sir, I didn't know." Before the Admiral could respond, a gnarled hand rested gently on his uniformed arm. It was Felix. "Admiral," the old man said, his voice quiet but firm. The boy was doing his job. He was following his orders, protecting his ship. He looked past the Admiral to Corbin, his eyes holding not anger but a deep, weary wisdom. The fault isn't in the sentry who guards the gate too fiercely. The fault is in those of us who fail to teach him who the real giants are. As he spoke, Felix's hand went to his breast pocket and withdrew the small, tarnished object he had clutched earlier. It was a simple St. Christopher medal, worn smooth with time. The Admiral's eyes widened in recognition. The peer faded away one last time. Felix saw a young lieutenant, his face grimy with sweat and oil, pressing the very same medal into his hand in the chaotic aftermath of their return to port. The young lieutenant's face was that of a much younger Admiral Thompson. "You saved us all, Felix," the young Thompson had said, his voice choked with relief and gratitude. "You saved my brother on the Enterprise. Take this. Never forget." Back in the present, the Admiral looked from the medal to Felix's face, his expression one of deep personal gratitude. He turned to the side and said, "Captain Sparks, would you do me the honor of accompanying me aboard my flagship?" Felix shook his head gently. "Thank you, Admiral. But I came to see this boat." He gestured to the Vanguard. He then looked at the crowd, at the Marines, at the whole spectacle. "I just wanted to do it quietly." The fallout was swift and decisive. Petty Officer Corbin was not dishonorably discharged. Instead, he was reassigned to the Naval Archives, where he spent the next 2 years cataloging mission reports from the Cold War. Admiral Thompson made sure his first assignment was to read the newly declassified file of the USS Stingray. A new fleet-wide training mandate was issued called the Sparks Protocol, focused on identifying and honoring veterans in civilian life, ensuring that deference and respect were not contingent on a valid security pass. A formal written apology was issued to Felix Sparks from the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. A few months later, a young sailor in a simple maintenance uniform was sitting in a small off-base diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He saw an old man with a simple wooden cane enter and take a seat at the counter. His heart leaped into his throat. It was Felix Sparks. After a long internal debate, the young man, Miles Corbin, got up from his booth. He walked over to the old man, his hands trembling. He stood there for a moment before Felix looked up. Corbin swallowed hard. "Sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper, I'm sorry." Felix looked at him, his pale blue eyes searching the young man's face. He saw no arrogance there now, only a deep and profound shame. Felix simply nodded once, then gestured to the empty stool beside him. "Sit," he said, his voice gentle. "Tell me about yourself, son." If you were moved by Felix Sparks' story of quiet courage, please like this video, share it with someone who respects our nation's heroes, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that must be told.